Thanks, Sue, for your nice little introduction to Ruth there, and the German. Danke, mein Fräulein. That's as far as it goes. Thanks to Mark for getting us to this point of the service, and for Katie, who chose all the songs that fit with the theme that we've been looking at. These last few weeks, we've been looking at different characters, as Mark said, going through the family tree of Jesus. We've given these different characters labels, as it were, for their characters. Abraham the unfair, we've looked at Jacob, he was a bit of a schemer. We looked at Tamar, who was forgotten, and last week we looked at Rahab. And now we're going to be looking today at Ruth the outsider. Ruth the outsider. How did a lady from a foreign land who used to worship foreign gods, she had no knowledge of God, no understanding of Jewish culture, she became part of this family Jewish tree of the most famous Jew that ever lived? How did this happen? Recently, I was helping Tom build his radio-controlled truck. It's called the Midnight Pumpkin, and when it's finished, it's going to be a replica of a pumped-up 1950s Chevy pickup truck. And as we started to build it, we were surrounded by hundreds of small screws, hundreds of thousands of tiny small bolts and bits of plastic chassis and all the rest of it. And I had to look not overwhelmed at this point, because I was supposed to be the one that was going to be helping him build this. So I should look like I know what I was doing, but I didn't. But anyway, we were surrounded by all these bits of bolts and screws, but there's just one part that looked a bit different to the rest. It didn't look like it belonged amongst all these bolts. So amongst all these shiny parts, there was this part that just looked completely out of place. It didn't fit into any molds that we had. It wasn't apparent as to where it should go or what you should do with it. So we just put it to one side. We carried on building. Tom and I, we carried on getting frustrated. We carried on losing bits and bobs. But we carried on, and eventually we managed to get it done. It began to take shape. The front suspension we put together, the rear suspension, managed to put that back together, the struts. Slowly it all came to fruition. There were many little tiny thousands of bolts that were scattered all over the dining room table. They all came into place. Eventually, the wheels were screwed on. This was the best bit. The wheels were screwed on. It started to look like a truck, and then the shiny chrome top was put on the top. It was all looking pretty cool. It was then that we saw the value of this obscure part that we'd put to the side, the part that wasn't the same as the others, a part that didn't fit until now. Now, some of you might have worked out what that part is already. That motor was integral to the build. That whole truck would have been useless without this small part. The other shiny screws, the bolts, they were actually used to support this nondescript part. That small piece that we put on the sidelines was the source of power to this whole truck that was being built. Tom's enjoyment, Tom's pleasure of this truck was dependent on those shiny bolts, but was also dependent on that little small nondescript motor that we can see there. So this unassuming, this ordinary looking part became the main reason that toy was bought in the first place. The power to move that truck at a really fast speed, and it is quite a fast truck once it's all charged up and good to go. And this is the story of Ruth, an ordinary person that was overlooked, undervalued. But God was able to use her to power through his aims, his plans. Ruth's story is a testament to God moving in this world and putting into place the people that were going to precede his son. The preparation of Jesus' arrival, which was done way before this world is even made, planned way before time, is being played out in these verses that we're going to read in a minute. So just like Ruth didn't fit, but became integral to the whole story of Jesus' genealogy, we're going to see that Jesus was shunned. Jesus was seen as an outsider. He was sidelined, but he was integral, wasn't he, to the plan of our salvation. So let's see what God's got to say from this little book. If you're concerned to Ruth, it's on page 267. And while you're turning to Ruth, I'm going to summarize this book for us. It's a family made up of a lady called Naomi. She's got a husband called Elimelech, and they leave Bethlehem in Judah to go to a place called Moab. Now, because of a famine, that's the reason that they go and leave Judah and go to this town called Moab. So Naomi and Elimelech, they've got two sons called Mahon and Kilon. So these two sons, they married two local Moabite women called Ruth and Orpah. This is a map of where Moab is in relation to Bethlehem. If they'd used the northern route, they'd have crossed over the top of a river called the River Jordan. And this was the river that the Israelites previously crossed about 50 years previously when they entered their land of Israel and they defeated Jericho. So that was the way they would have gone over. Jericho is about 12 o'clock to the top of that lake or the sea. It's interesting and significant as well that they crossed back into the desert to live, even though God had given them the place of Israel to stay. So Naomi's husband, Elimelech, he dies, and then 10 years pass while they're living in Moab. And Naomi's sons, Mahlon and Chilion, they both die as well. So Naomi is left completely alone apart from these two daughters-in-law. Naomi now hears that the famine has passed in Judah, so she prepares to return home. And then she decides to return home then with getting the names mixed up now, Naomi and Orpah. So Ruth and Naomi, they return to Bethlehem, and Naomi then tries to pick up where she left off all those years ago, but Orpah stays behind. So Ruth then meets this wealthy landowner called Boaz back in Bethlehem, and he's a relative of Naomi. And then we're introduced to this strange term called a kinsman redeemer. We'll hear more about that later. But this is a legal obligation where if a family member is in need, then the other family members act on their behalf and they help them out in times of trouble. So if a relative's land needs to be sold because they've come into poverty, the kinsman redeemer, or the person that's in their family, is obliged to buy that land for them, to keep that land in the family, as it were. And also the same with a widow. If a family member dies and leaves a widow, it's the closest relative then who's required to marry that widow and continue the family name. And Matt mentioned this process when he talked about Tamar a few weeks back. So the kinsman's role is to ensure that the family possessions stay within the family and the family name stays within the family as well. That's retained. So here then we get a love story then that develops between Ruth and Boaz, and then Ruth starts the process of fulfilling his role as a kinsman redeemer, even though there's someone closer in line to Ruth and him. So to give the ending away, Boaz is successful in his claim to redeem Ruth, and they end up getting married, and then she gives birth to a son, and then in only 3 generations' time, her family line sees the birth of King David. So Ruth's line continues some generations later, and Jesus is born in that very same town. So that's the quick summary of Ruth. So I just want to pick up on a few things that we see how Ruth moves from being an outsider to then becoming on the inside. And we'll see how her position changed from being a foreigner to someone who is integral to the Jewish family tree. So we first meet Ruth about 10 years into the story. It's quite a condensed story, this. We're given a lot of background and people that support Ruth's character, and then we see how Ruth fits in to the whole story. And it's only when Naomi decides to return home that we then are first introduced to Ruth. And we're given a clue as to Ruth's personality. So if you look at chapter 1, verse 8. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you've shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." At this they wept aloud. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Verse 15, "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." Notice the difference here between the choices of Ruth and the choice of Orpah, which highlights the difference between Israel and the land of Moab. Naomi said that Orpah is going to go back and return to her gods. Verse 15. Gods here is with a small g, and there's plural. There's more than one. So the Moabites, they worshipped a few idols, a few gods, but their main god was the god of Chemosh. He was a god of war, and because there was lots of fighting going on in those days, this Chemosh got a lot of worship. But when they weren't worshipping this idol called Chemosh, the Moabites also worshipped a god called Baal. Now, the worship to these gods involved animals, sheep, goats, bulls, all the rest of it, but it also involved human sacrifices, which showed or gives us an idea of where they were in terms of being a society. They often used to sacrifice their children as well. So there was child sacrifices going on. So Moab is not really in a good place. So Ruth wanted the opposite of Orpah. She wanted to follow Naomi's God, didn't she? Naomi's God with a capital G. Over the years of watching Naomi, Ruth must have gained an understanding, a respect for Naomi, a respect for her faith. So now she saw an opportunity to have that for herself. So Orpah was happy with the gods of Moab and the paganism there, but Ruth clings to Naomi, doesn't she? Ruth realizes that Naomi and her God is all that she's got left. So despite growing up in Moab, Ruth realizes that her people, her culture, are not worth staying around for. So I just wanted to apply that thought to ourselves this morning. What are we clinging on to? What culture, what people are we wanting to spend our time with? Those who follow Jesus have decided to live for him, haven't we? Christians, which means little Christs, have realized that this culture, this world, doesn't really offer anything. Like Ruth, you need to cling to what God says, what God promises, what he says. And it turns out that decision that Ruth made that day turned her life around forever. She can look back on that time as when she really started becoming a Christian, as it were, and following what God wants. It's a shame that we don't actually hear from Orpah ever again, do we? Her name just disappears off into history. Yet Ruth's name lives on. We're talking about it now, aren't we? Her name is forever written into the genealogy of Jesus. Her name lives on in Jesus' family tree. We need to pick well, don't we, what we cling to. So for those of us who cling to Jesus, it means that your name is not actually forgotten. It's the exact opposite. I'll give you a verse now. You actually hear your name being read out in heaven, where you're going to spend an eternity with him. Revelation 3 says this: the one who's victorious will be dressed in white. I'll never blot out the name of that person from the book of life, but will acknowledge that name, your name, before my Father and his angels. Now, if you turn your back on God, just like Orpah did, you then seal your own fate. Because Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 7, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of my Father in heaven. And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Strong words there from Jesus, isn't there? There's no wriggle room at all for us to get out of. It's very black and white. Who or what are we clinging on to this morning? So Ruth and Naomi, they travel the 50-odd miles back from Moab to Bethlehem, just outside Jerusalem. And you read this, if you look at chapter 1, verse 19. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. So this is a sad scene here of Naomi and, just Naomi really at the minute, coming back to Bethlehem with her tail between her legs. To the locals, a couple of years ago back, Naomi would have been off with her husband, 2 sons, full of life, going off to find a new life over in Moab. Now she comes back, a stranger really, an outsider, no husband, no sons, just no means of support, just this stranger called Ruth. And that verse then, seeing that, reminded me of another couple who stumbled into Bethlehem tired and needing some support. It's almost poetic that almost 1,000 years later, Joseph and a pregnant Mary, both relatives of Ruth, they stumble into this same town, wanting support, wanting a place to stay. So Naomi and Ruth, they come back to Bethlehem as outsiders. Now, Sue touched on this. Whilst Naomi and Ruth, they both spoke Hebrew, similar sort of language, but Ruth's dialect would have been slightly different. There'd have been different accents, there'd have been different use of their words. And it had been obvious to the people of Bethlehem that Ruth was not from that place. Now, I moved schools a few times when I was younger, and I remember moving from Guildford, from Cardiff, to a place called Guildford in Surrey when I was about 10 or 11. Now, those of you who might not know where Guildford is, it's in Surrey, which is quite a posh place. You know, if you live in Guildford, you might have had elocution lessons, and you live in leafy suburbs, and it's all quite well to do, quite nice. Nothing like us as a family when we turned up. And I was in class once in school, in Northmead Middle School, and I must have been quite impressed with something the teacher did or something the teacher said, because I kind of turned around saying, "That's mega, that is, that's lush." There's just tumbleweed in the class. as they were trying to work out what I'd just actually said and what it was how I'd spoken these strange words to them. It just didn't fit with this posh dialect. So I was trying to explain my use of lush and how it's a brilliant word and it gets across quite well what we mean, but they just didn't have a clue. I had my work cut out because I was an outsider. To fit in that school, I had to work on how I spoke and to become accepted, maybe change how I held myself. Ruth would have experienced the same sort of thing. Her accent, her use of words would have betrayed her heritage. Everyone would have known she was from Moab. She'd have had the same learning curves as me. An outsider in Bethlehem. Everything would have been new. Accents, beliefs, customs. And I think that leaves a challenge for us. I don't know why I'm speaking here. Sue, you've said everything that needs to be said. As a church community, we need to be aware that not everyone understands what we say. We need to make everyone feel welcome, don't we? What we say or what we mean is sometimes two different things, or a foreign language to some people. If I said we'd met in the fridge, some of you might know where I mean. We often talk about the Oasis area. What's that? If I said to you that we had a good get-together on Thursday with the Intergen group, there's a few blank faces. We need to be mindful, don't we, of our visitors, how they might be feeling when they walk in through the door. Now we think Bethesda's easy because we're here all the time, aren't we? But that's not the case for outsiders. That's not the case for our visitors. Just like me, when I walked into that school in Guildford, walking into church can be really hard. It can be really hard. If you're on the welcoming team this morning, you've got a really important job. You, at that moment on that door, the only link between an outsider and church, aren't you? How you speak, what you speak, how you say is massively important. And I want to encourage those who are on the welcome team, keep it up. You might think, and others might think, you're just swinging a door open, but it's not. It's much more important than that, isn't it? You're important as a tech team. You're as important as the bands. Your welcome, your choice of words determines how an outsider is going to feel about coming into Bethesda. Let's be in tune with our visitors, don't we? We need to be in tune with people who are outsiders, be aware of who's who, who's new, and to speak to those people that perhaps we're not sure where they're from. So for those who are still wondering, the fridge is the room at the back as you walk in on the right. It's traditionally been seen as a cold room, so it's always been called the fridge. The Oasis is that area there that's been named after a coffee shop that Bethesda used to run. And Intergen, I've got an invested interest here. Intergen is short for intergenerational group that meets on Thursday. So if you're old, please come along, because we need some more older people. Pat and Brian want some support. So Intergen, come and see me afterwards if you're interested. Okay, Ruth the outsider is now Ruth on the side. Now let me explain that. Naomi, knowing the customs of Judah and the laws of Judah, she tells Ruth that the way to get some food is to go into the fields and pick up the crops that are purposely left on the sides of the fields and in the corners. The harvesters go along, chop down all the corn, wheat, whatever it is, but they leave bits behind. And they do that on purpose. And this is called gleaning. So God gave this law to Moses when the Israelites were wandering around in the desert, saying that the harvesters go along, but they're supposed to leave bits of food in the corners of the field, and they don't pick up anything. And Naomi is telling Ruth that she needs to use this gleaning option. This is what she needs to do as a means of support. They've got no income, so use this gleaning rule that God has given. Read chapter 2. Now Moses had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Now God is well aware of those who couldn't afford to feed themselves, and he'd made provision for this. And it's here that those who help in food bank can be encouraged. So I think food bank is a modern day gleaning, isn't it? Those who've got plenty, they leave some for those who don't have enough. And supporting food bank is the same. Those who have enough give from their supply to give to those who perhaps need it a bit more than we do. So for those who work in food bank, be encouraged that what you're doing is actually in line with what God wants. You realize there's people in need, and you're doing something about it. And that's a reminder for us to support food bank, if not with our time, then with our donations, and that's something we can get involved in here. So Boaz must have been impressed with Ruth's work ethic, because he sees her working and he goes over and speaks to her and he says this, chapter 2, verse 8. So Boaz says to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, in verse 10, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Ruth realized here her position before Boaz. She realized that he was the field owner and he'd shown an interest just in her. She appreciates that he had now given her his protection. He'd also provided for her by saying, "Go and have as much water as you want from the jars." Ruth's amazed at this offer of generosity and gives him the ultimate credit by then bowing her face down to almost touching the floor, saying, "He noticed me, a foreigner." She realized, didn't she? And she acknowledged the massive gap in their social positions. You've got Boaz, a wealthy landowner who's got food to spare, people working for him. You've got Ruth, a poor widow, an immigrant, no means to support, no idea what the beliefs and cultures are of that land. She admits she's an outsider, didn't she? Someone doesn't really belong. Now, reading that acknowledgement that she just said, "You notice me, a foreigner," reminded me of when a repentant tax collector was in the temple praying. Don't know if you remember it in Luke chapter 18. I'll remind you. The tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." Jesus said, I tell you that this man went home justified before God. So I just want to ask us this. Have we all got to that point where, like Ruth acknowledged Boaz and his kindness, have we acknowledged and realized how much God has given for us? Have we asked for his mercy? Like Ruth, we've got nothing to offer, have we? But we've been brought into so much. Boaz noticed Ruth, and God notices us this morning. He wants to provide for us. He wants to offer us his protection. He wants to allow us to access all his resources. Boaz looked past Ruth's dirty clothes. He looked past her strange, funny accent. He looked past the fact that she knew nothing of his beliefs or customs. He just met her, didn't he, at her lowest point. At her lowest point, just loved her. Just loved her. God's done exactly the same for us, hasn't he? Mark's referenced this. The Apostle Paul wrote this in Ephesians. "Because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in our transgressions. It's by grace that you've been saved." Because of all the wrong things that we've done, we're seen as stinking dirty before a holy God, aren't we? We're in dirty clothes. We've got nothing to offer. We've got no clue how God works. Yet he's willing to still accept us, isn't he? Have we bowed down before him? Have we confessed our sin? Have we confessed that we're a foreigner to him? Are we willing to accept the love that he's offering to us and his provision to us? If you read on, you see how the development, the relationship develops between Boaz and Ruth. And Ruth is guided here by Naomi, and she initiates this redeeming process that we mentioned earlier. So Boaz can lay claim to Ruth. So now Boaz works with the legal system, and he meets with the town leaders, and he starts negotiations regarding getting back Ruth's land, Naomi's husband's land. So Boaz meets with those who are in charge of this. He meets with the leaders of the town. And if you look at chapter 4, verse 4, we can read the negotiations there. He meets with the relative who's next in line to inherit everything. "I thought I should bring this matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. So if you redeem it, do so. But if you're not, tell me so I will know. But no one has the right to do it except you. I am next in line." "I'll redeem it," says the relative. Then Boaz says, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." It's interesting to hear that Boaz first offers the man claim on the land, but then when he agrees to do it, then he slips in the detail that Ruth's going to come with this package. It's only when the relative knew that he was going to inherit Ruth as well, did he then change his mind. He was quite happy to have the land. He didn't want Ruth. So this relative is a dilemma. He had the chance here for a piece of land, but then he had to have provided for Ruth. Ruth was an extra financial burden now. He had to support his own family, but he didn't really then want to go and support Ruth. The other reason he wasn't interested in Ruth was that if he purchased the land, ultimately that would be lost to any heirs with Ruth. She was a cost to him now, but she'd also be a cost to him further down the line. If any children they had together would be lost to them. So normally this relative would have been happy to take this on. He had taken on something he knew, taken on something he understood, but now he's having responsibility for Ruth, someone he didn't really understand, who came from a land that he didn't really understand. She was a foreigner, she was an outsider. Why should he look after her? They have child sacrifices in Moab. I don't want to get involved in anything that is linked with that. There are often fights between Moab and the people of Judah. Boaz knew, though, didn't he? He understood Ruth. He was still willing to accept her, even though he knew she had this Moabite background. He was still willing to go ahead with this process. The relative, he discounted Ruth, not knowing, though, what he was giving up. If he'd bothered with Ruth, he'd have found himself in the line of the King David, wouldn't he? He'd have been playing a significant part in the family line of Jesus. But just like Orpah didn't want to know, and she disappeared into history, so this man just fades away now into the story. We don't even get given his name. He's that insignificant in terms of his choices. Are we like this relative? Are we overlooking the person of Jesus based on our preconceived ideas? Ruth was rejected because she had this Moabite tag. Jesus was dismissed because he came from a backwater town in Nazareth. A chap called Nathanael wrote off Jesus when he said this: "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Again, this tag, this linked with people. Ruth might not have looked spectacular with her sweaty hands and covered in dirt and bits of corn or stalk on her hair and on her clothes. A man once described Jesus as this: he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. There's similarities there, isn't there? But Boaz was willing to be all in for Ruth. He was willing to take on her negative background. He was willing to take on the fact that she didn't look spectacular, perhaps, in her work outfit. He was willing to put up with any laughter they'd have had taking on this foreigner. This morning I want to ask, have we all claimed the outsider that the world has written off? Just like claiming Ruth brought cost, so Jesus is going to bring cost to us. You will be laughed at. Jesus will require effort. Jesus will require your time, but the rewards will be worth it. Jesus' friends, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all write this as from what Jesus said: "If anyone will come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." So following Jesus is going to cost. But look at what Jesus said after saying, "Taking up your cross." "For what good is it for a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? What can a man give in exchange for his soul?" We need to realize, don't we, the cons of this world are far too many in relation to that singular pro of knowing Jesus and spending an eternity with him. Your soul is the most important part of you. It's designed to live forever. So this world's eventually going to go. This where you, as a person, spends eternity is what counts, isn't it? Are you going to be in heaven with Jesus, or are you going to forfeit that for a short life down here and spend forever in hell? Okay, I'm just going to finish on this. Ruth's gone now from being on the outsider. Come in, John. Go on. No. Ruth's gone from being the outsider to working on the sides to now she's on the inside. Ruth was integral now to how God was going to push his plans forward. Ruth married into what became the royal line of Israel. From an unknown person being on the outside, she's now a significant branch of Jesus' family tree. Ruth chapter 4, verse 16. "Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, 'Naomi has a son,' and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David." Jesus, as we've been learning over these last couple of weeks, had all sorts of characters in his family tree, and now Ruth has now been assimilated into it. I've just got the genealogy here. I'm just going to read through it all really slowly. Now, let's just look at the bit I've underlined. Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. "Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. Jesse, the father of King David." Now, skip down a few names, and you get to this in verse 16, if you can read it. Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Christ. If you read this family tree in full, you'll see that all the names are men. But notice that God wanted 3 non-Jewish women in his family tree: Tamar, Ruth, and Rahab. So from a list of solely male Jewish names, God wasn't ashamed to include a young widow, a prostitute, and an idol-worshipping Gentile as part of his family. God, through his son Jesus, has allowed us to be in his family. Now, Jesus' cousin John was blown away by this concept, and he wrote this in his book. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are. So I just want to ask this morning and finish on this. Are you an outsider to the family of God? Accept Jesus in your life. Thank him for his death for you. Claim his promise, and he will add you into his family. You'll be in that family tree. Just like Boaz accepted Ruth, God's going to accept you. He's welcoming you, and then he'll give you a new start to your life. Let's pray, and then we'll sing our last song, and then the service will be over. Lord, thank you for Ruth. Thank you for her conviction to give up her previous life and follow you. We just thank you for the example of Boaz and how he was prepared to accept Ruth for who she was, despite her background, and we'll just ask that you will help us accept outsiders the same. Thank you for your offer to take us in our low state, where we can offer you nothing in return. Thank you for the love that you've shown us. For those of us who have been accepted into your family, we thank you again for paying that massive cost, for purchasing us and giving us a future with you. I ask now that you'll work on those who've yet to accept you. Convict those who still need to trust in you. Let them see and appreciate how your death was the lengths you went to redeem us. Just pray this in your name. Amen. Amen.